remove an old oil tank. And I was giving him a hand. All of a sudden, rah, rah, rah. I said, what the hell is that all about? I said, oh my God, I'm supposed to be on a Zoom meeting in 10 minutes. I said, guys, just handle it.
Yeah, it's easy for time to get away from you. So, but
Yeah,
it's
it would have been embarrassing if I came back in at like 8:30 and there was an email from you. Where the hell were you? It's like, oh. So
okay.
hopefully we should be good to go.
All right. All right, we're live on Facebook, so thank you everyone for your patience. All right, so good evening, everyone. We have Tom Nemeth joining us here again. It's been quite a while since you presented for us, Tom, but you always bring a great presentation. So we're looking forward to seeing your photography on the Lehigh Valley across New Jersey. So without further ado, Tom, the floor is yours.
Ready? Hello, everybody. My name is Tom Nemeth, in case you haven't heard of me. Rail Pace Magazine since 1982. Anyway, my show tonight is on the Lehigh Valley across New Jersey, and it's a compilation of slides since when I first started taking pictures back in 1962 up to 1976 when the Lehigh Valley was no more. Now, I will apologize in advance for some of the early slides that I took because they were taken with sort of garbage cameras. So they were, some of them you have speed blur because the trains were going 60 miles an hour back then. That was the speed limit on the valley through Bound Brook and that area in New Jersey. And back then cameras typically shot at 125th of a second or 1/300th of a second. It was only like around 1964 that SLRs came out where you could set your camera at 500 and actually stop action pretty well. But that aside, there's pictures that even if they're not absolutely technically perfect, how many shots of Lehigh Valley PAs do you have? That's basically, you don't want to throw them away. You want to enjoy them and share them with other people. So if we're ready, I can share screen. And what this show does, it's about 35 minutes long and it runs automatically. In other words, I don't have to click, click, click anything. So when I set it up, I use a program called Photo Magico, which is pretty neat, pretty easy to use. And you can vary the time that each slide is on the screen independently. In other words, you don't have to set every slide for 10 seconds or 15 seconds. So when there's a map or something of greater interest that I need to explain, it should be on the screen longer. Now, you can never please everybody. Some people will say, next slide. And some people will say, oh man, it was too quick. I wanted to study that. Well, I tried to pick a happy medium. And one thing, one advantage of having the show run automatically is it does eliminate the guy in the back of the room who says, can you go back to that last slide? And when you try and do that, anybody who's run a slide projector knows that can degenerate into a nightmare. So without further ado, how about we share screen? I think that's how we're supposed to do this. And then, see if I can figure this out. Okay, participants can now see my screen. So if I get over here, click on this, it should work. Okay, the Lehigh Valley across New Jersey. By the way, if anybody has any technical problem or anything, send me a text to 908-202-0177. That's my phone number. But this should work automatically. Couple of title slides here. That's at South Plainfield, New Jersey. That's an eastbound train. So here we are, the Lehigh Valley main line from Jersey City to Jutland, New Jersey. That's pretty much most of New Jersey. It did go all the way to Phillipsburg. The map just doesn't show it. But that'll show much of the area that we're going to cover in this presentation. And that map is from the Anthracite Railroad Historical Society. So here we are at the east end of the railroad. Up in the upper right-hand corner of this map, you can see the Jersey City docks. They were adjacent to the Jersey Central Communipaw passenger station. They were on the north side. And the Lehigh Valley ran south down through Bayonne and then crossed the Newark Bay on the joint bridge. So here we are. The Lehigh Valley had a marine fleet for moving their car floats around. There's the old World Trade Center that was under construction. So these shots are from like 1964 era. And that is the Bethlehem, that tug there. And here's the Lehigh Valley Yards, where the car floats were on the north side of the CNJ in Communipaw section of Jersey City. And they had a little diesel track there. I wouldn't call it an engine terminal, but it was a diesel track where a couple of switchers were parked. Now this is in Greenville Yard. Lehigh Valley also had a yard there, which was next to the PRR Greenville Yard, which is still there. And that's part of that New Jersey, New York rail operation. Now here's the Lehigh Valley passenger train. This is not my shot. It was taken by someone, I'm not sure who, but I came across these slides, and this is the point where they detached the PAs in Newark and attached the GG1 for the run into New York. That's probably the Maple Leaf. That was the last train standing on the valley. And that quit in, I think, January or February of '61. And here's the G on, and the PA is cut off. That's NK Tower on the left. And the CNJ trains now run through here for New Jersey Transit. Now here's Oak Island Yard. That was the Lehigh Valley's main yard in Newark, New Jersey. And that is still active under Conrail, which serves CSX and Norfolk Southern. And if you look in the lower left-hand corner of that map, you'll see where it says Lehigh Valley. That's where the Valley Main is. And New Jersey Transit passenger trains run on that section of the Lehigh Valley. Here we are at Oak Island Engine Terminal. This is about 1963 or 64. As you can see, a lot of Alco switchers and a couple of cab units, EMDs and Alcos. Notice the LV on the light tower. There's an SW on the turntable. Turntable's still there. The Pennsy P&H branch in the background. And the Lehigh Valley had a 44 tonner, and this worked the docks, but it was in Oak Island at the time. Valley had a lot of old switchers. There's another shot at number 60. What would you give to go back and see that? And there's what we used to call a DL701, which is really like a chop nose RS11. I think these were built in 1960. They had 4 of them. Now, in the very early days of the Lehigh Valley, early diesel days, they ran pure power, like ABBA F7s and ABBA FAs. They usually didn't mix power. But in the mid-1960s, they got into the way that most railroads did, where you saw Jeeps and F units and Alcos all mixed in together in a consist. Most of these pictures were taken on a weekend when we weren't in school. I usually went down there with my friend Bill Chaplick. And of course, there was a PA there one day. They used these on local jobs, believe it or not, like on the Bloodgood branch and on the runs out to Manville and South Plainfield. They'd have a single PA and a local freight. And before you ask, how did they turn it around? The answer is they didn't. It just ran backwards. I'm sure the crew didn't like that, but that's what they had to deal with. These shots are all in Newark, all at Oak Island. Here's an example of a mixed consist where it's ABB Jeep. And here's a gaggle of Jeeps. This was in the later years because it's in the later paint scheme. They also had visiting engines. A couple of times they had DT&I units and they had PRR units that were brought in for testing to determine if they wanted to buy that type of model. Now here is an LNHR engine, which managed to find its way down to Oak Island. That was in the 1970s. And here's the GP38s. That's another early 1960s shot. The Penske P&H branch in the background. Fortunately, I was able to shoot a lot of the equipment. So that adds a little bit of a dimension to railroading when you have more than just roster shots of engines. That was part of a wreck service train. Still had the seats in it. A lot of times these equipment shots are good for modeling projects. And there's one of the famous white cabooses, 95032. I believe that one is owned by Rich John from the Anthracite Railroad Historical Society. All right, I guess you're chomping at the bit, wanting to get out on the road. You've seen enough roster shots for one day, so here we go. Here's a local coming out of Oak Island with the 215 on the point. And here's the Baldwin that on weekends was always parked alongside Route 22 in Hillside, New Jersey. And this is at a place called Townley, which is east of Cranford on the Lehigh Valley. Now it's called Union, where there's a New Jersey Transit passenger station near here. And that's on the SIRT connection in Cranford. It's the Garden State Parkway Bridge in the background. And he's dropping down to the SIRT to interchange. And that's the same place. There's the switch down to the interchange. That's a westbound freight, Garden State Parkway in the background. And that's also in Cranford. Notice the LV on the bridge. Back in those days, railroads had class. They painted their name on highway overpasses. Here's 210 out on the main line, out around Cranford. And here's an unusual curved switch. So for all you model railroaders that have curved switches, here's the prototype. It's in South Plainfield, New Jersey. I don't know if it's still there. This was back in the 1970s. The points actually weren't curved. It was the frogs and the length of the switch that was curved. There's a westbound freight. In the 1970s, the Lehigh Valley became very busy for freight. There was at least 4 trains a day each way in daylight. And South Plainfield was a great place to catch the action because there was a yard there, still is, and most trains stopped and made setoffs there. Now, in the early 1960s, the Valley did not run a lot of daylight trains. In fact, they had one eastbound train in daylight that was dependable, and we called it the time freight because it was the time freight. It was the only one you saw. Here's South Plainfield Station back in the days. This was probably around 1962. It was used by freight agents. And so even after passenger service quit, there were still employees in there. And you could run in there and ask if anything was coming, and they usually knew. And in the later years, in the 1970s, there was an eastbound and a westbound train that almost reliably showed up about noontime. So if you went there at noon, you could almost count on seeing two trains. Station, of course, is long gone. It's been leveled. So the tracks going off to the right lead into South Plainfield Yard, which was a major distribution point for locals. There's your westbound, there's your eastbound, and the eastbound, the one on the left, is taking the switch to go into the yard. Here's an eastbound on the main. Used to be a grade crossing here, and it was replaced by an overpass. Here's another one shot of one of those midday trains with two C628s. Station was starting to fall into a little bit of disrepair at this time. This was like the early 1970s. Now here's a train coming into the yard. Notice there's a train on the right going westbound. There's a 638 over there. Anyway, a lot of your eastbound trains set off for the yard. Not so much with the westbound trains. It was mostly eastbound. And here he is coming off the main into the yard. Here's another shot in the yard, an ABBA, which was pretty rare. That's on the main line, just west of the station in South Plainfield. And here's a train pulling into the yard. If you look down along the left side of the train, you can see the station. Now this track on the left was the Perth Amboy branch, which was the original main line of the Lehigh Valley before they built to Newark and ultimately Jersey City. So here's a train coming into the yard. You can see just the corner of the station on the right. And here's a switcher in the yard. There was always something happening at the yard. They were either drilling the yard or a train was pulling in to set off. Here's an interesting lash up. And this time I got invited up in the cab for a mini cab ride. That's the yard at South Plainfield. There's another train. So over the years, we saw a wide variety of motive power from GP38s to Century 628s to Century 420s to F units. This is taken from the overpass. Station was still standing when the overpass got put in. That's a westbounder. Nice freshly painted gondola car there. Now that's the east end of South Plainfield Yard. You don't see too many pictures from down there. It actually reconnected to the main line off to the right, but that wasn't very often used. Most trains pulled in and then backed out on the west end. Here's a train that made a pickup and was backing against this train. Every once in a while, if I saw a freight car that was worth modeling, I would get a picture of it. Notice square hatched one. Now we're over in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. That's the Outer Bridge crossing in the background. And the Lehigh Valley had an engine house there and a turntable. This was around 1974. And there's a Baldwin sitting there. Place was pretty decrepit. I mean, the place hadn't been painted in like 75 years. But it was still used. And there was usually a pair of Alco switchers, sometimes a Baldwin, assigned to Perth Amboy. The train to Perth Amboy ran to South Plainfield. It was a local, but it usually ran at night, so there's very few pictures of it. There's still the Outer Bridge crossing in the upper right-hand corner there. The Outer Bridge crossing is from Perth Amboy to Staten Island. It's a highway bridge. And here we had a little wreck. This is in between South Plainfield and Middlesex, behind Harris Steel, which is still there, by the way, and is still a railroad customer. They had a little oops. There's a cyanamide tank car. Cyanamide was in Bridgewater, just west of Bound Brook. Back in these days, you could just walk in and take pictures. There were no cops. Nobody chased you out. There's a gray Erie Lackawanna boxcar in the background there. Made its last run. Now here we are. This is in Piscataway, the Newmarket section of Piscataway, Prospect Avenue crossing. And it's a favorite place for rail fans. And this is over by, this is in Middlesex with a PA on a freight running wrong rail, heading westbound. The CNJ is over on the left in this shot. And this is the same place coming in the opposite direction. The CNJ is just behind those trees. The CNJ in the Lehigh Valley ran parallel from Middlesex to Bound Brook, like right here. Over on the right there is the CNJ main line, lost in the trees, of course. This is from the Mountain Avenue grade crossing overpass. And this is at Cedar Avenue in Middlesex. If you look carefully, there's a CNJ baggage car in a siding in the background there, just to the left of the fellow that's standing by the red flag. And there's an example of a local that's being run with an A unit running backwards. And there's a passenger service equipped boxcar over there on the siding on the CNJ. And this is at the Cedar Avenue crossing with a white Lehigh Valley boxcar. By the way, there's one of them at Steamtown now that's been restored. And here's the 216 westbound. This is coming into Bound Brook, New Jersey. He's physically in Middlesex on that side of the river. And that is the Bound Brook. That's the name of the brook. And his train is in Bound Brook. That's an eastbound. It's number 216. And here we are at Bound Brook. The Bound Brook train station is over on the right. If you look carefully, you can see the red CNJ sign. And here was early one morning in Bound Brook with, those are FA1s, by the way. Notice, not FA2s. Those are FA1s. And there's a PA running backwards on a local freight. Notice the caboose in the middle of the consist. Now that track is still there. The CNJ is up on the right, which is now New Jersey Transit. And this is Conrail, which hosts CSX and Norfolk Southern. But I think it was a lot better when it hosted Lehigh Valley. And over on the right, out of sight, is the Lehigh Valley freight station in Bound Brook, and there was a little team track there. That is me about 60 years ago. I was invited up in the cab. The Lehigh Valley crews are fairly friendly. A lot of times you'd get asked to come up and take a ride or get in the cab. I got a ride to Manville this day on the local, and we met a freight. Of course, shot through a dirty window, but it was still a nice surprise to see that. And here's two trains at once, east and west. And we've got FA2s going eastbound and something going westbound. Now there's an FA1 on the point. It's right at the Bound Brook station. That building is still there. Here's an RS3 sitting there. The signal is on the CNJ. The signal's gone now. And here is just west of the CNJ station. Now there's a CNJ GP40P over on the left there. So this has to be after 1969. Here's a train coming east. Track on the far left is the Port Reading branch of the Reading that now connects to the Lehigh Valley main line or the Conrail main line at that point. Here's light power going west at the Bound Brook station. It's an FA, third unit. And there's a CNJ wooden plywood hack over a caboose over on the right. And this was the time freight. Came about 2:30 in the afternoon. And it was usually, talk about precision schedule railroading. At 2:30, there was always a headlight down the track, and there was the time freight. It didn't come at 3 o'clock, didn't come at 2 o'clock, it came at 2:30, and you could count on it. And that was good during the winter when it was freezing cold out, because you didn't want to stand outside for a long period of time waiting for it. Over the years, the local service morphed into various configurations. Sometimes the crews came out of Easton, sometimes they came out of Manville, sometimes they came out of South Plainfield. Sometimes there was two crews, one each way, and they met at Bound Brook. So every year was a new treat. Here's a pair of PAs on an eastbound freight in the afternoon. And here's a pair of FAs. The cobblestone in the foreground was part of the team tracks for the Lehigh Valley. Here's westbound PAs. I don't know what kind of slide processing this was, but it wasn't the best, obviously. It almost looks like it's a print, but it was a slide. Again, this was back in the era when stopping action was tough, and the valley came rip-roaring through here at 60 miles an hour. So it was tough to stop an action shot. Back then, it was just, oh, it's just PAs again. You know, if you were looking for something special, it's like, oh man, I really want to see one of those new engines. Notice the CNJ commuter car in the background. That's when New Jersey DOT started upgrading the CNJ fleet. And there's one of those make safety a habit cabooses, 95153. This was the day they tried out a couple of Penske DL600s. And the only way I got this shot was the fact the train went in emergency and stopped. So I was able to run down the track, run across in front of it. Of course, it was stopped, and run over here and get a going away shot. Sometimes you get lucky. That was always one of the challenges. When you were at Bound Brook over on the CNJ, photographing, notice the side braced boxcar there. When you were over on the CNJ photographing something, you always had to be aware that you could be missing something on the Lehigh Valley. So you constantly had to keep running over and looking down the track or listening for horns. And there was nothing worse than being over there, shooting something like an LNHR covered hopper on the left and then missing this. Here's in Bound Brook Yard, if you want to call it a yard. There was one or two side tracks and a hopper trestle where they could unload hopper cars. This was one of the years when they had the meet, where there were two separate crews. One came from the west, one came from South Plainfield, and they met at Bound Brook. Another shot with a CNJ caboose in the background. It was nice because it was an area that was fairly open and nobody bothered you. And here's open top auto rack cars. And here we are again. This is a little bit west of Bound Brook. The bridge on the left is the Reading's Port Reading branch. Here's a light unit. Like I said, things could sneak up on you. A lot of times you wouldn't hear anything, and all of a sudden, look, here comes an engine. One day the wrecking crane was in Bound Brook. That's sitting on the interchange track. And there's the 353 going through Bound Brook. That car is at Steamtown now. That was an inspection train. Now, here's a train on the interchange track. For a short period of time, one of their piggyback trains, probably the Apollo, stopped and set off cars for the CNJ. And then the CNJ took those cars to Somerville, where the CNJ had a piggyback ramp. Here's an example of dropping cars on the CNJ main line. It's looking west on the CNJ. The Lehigh Valley is over on the left. And here he is digging out. Notice the Union Carbide hopper car there, covered hopper. Here's another train coming up the interchange track. I believe this time it was because there was a wreck on the valley east of here, and they used the CNJ, and then they used the Aldine ramp. That was opened in 1967, the Aldine ramp. Now, this is just west of Bound Brook. There's a freight going east and a local coming west. So there were times when the valley did get busy. The valley on the left. Here we are again, just west of Bound Brook. There was three through truss bridges between Bound Brook and Manville. This is actually in Bridgewater, the township of Bridgewater. Here's a train stopped on the main line, and that's 287 overpass in the background. Here's the looking in the other direction, 287 overpass, but you don't see this going under there anymore. This is almost into Manville. In fact, this side of the bridge is Manville. The other side is Bridgewater. It's also called Port Reading Junction. So you can see relatively where Bound Brook is over on the right, the CNJ in the valley and the Reading. Port Reading Junction, the valley crossed the Reading at grade on a diamond. And the CNJ is just north of there, and that was heading west to Somerville and Raritan. And there's a deck bridge at the Bridgewater to Manville border, and it's a nice location for photography, even today. You can still get these shots. And of course, not with F units. I'm standing on the Port Reading Bridge, which is also still there. They needed a weed sprayer train, but gives it sort of a rural look. This is right at Port Reading Junction. And the white C628s are waiting for this eastbound guy. And there's the diamonds. The sign says speed limit 50 miles an hour. That's on the Reading. So the Lehigh Valley train is eastbound there. And there's his hind end. And there's where I had a cab ride on the valley, and that's the Reading Crusader coming westbound in the afternoon when it was an 8-car train. And it used to be double diamonds there. There's no diamonds there today. It's simply a connecting switch from the Reading, former Reading, to the Conrail eastbound Lehigh Valley main line. This is at John's Manville, which was a big employer in Manville. Now we're out farther west. This is out at around Sunnyside, almost out to Jutland. And this is the Clinton branch. There was a branch line off the Lehigh Valley that ran up to Clinton, New Jersey, went under Route 78, and usually ran on Sundays. There was a local crew that went out there on Sundays and switched the lumber yard up there. And this shot is taken from Route 78. You can still stand there and get this angle, but there's no railroad there. There's still a lumber yard there. Had a little yard there, 3 or 4 tracks. It was just branch line railroading, something that we don't see much of anymore. Now we're at Pattenberg Tunnel. It used to be double track. Now it's single track through the tunnel to provide greater clearance for stack trains. And that is Bellwood Tower. That structure has been demolished. The tower is no longer there. It was closed at the time, but the structure was still there for signal maintainers. Here's an eastbound coming out of the tunnel. The tunnel's a mile long, 1 mile long. It goes under Route 78. If you've ever driven on Route 78, when you go through that massive cut in the rock on 78, the tunnel is actually going under the road at that point. And that quarry in the background, that's also gone. And this is out of Bloomsbury, New Jersey, coming by the Agway. The Valley single tracked about 1964. It used to be double track out here. This is a westbound in the afternoon. This is now Norfolk Southern's Lehigh line. And again, there's that Sunday local, just a light engine running along to switch out a couple local customers. And this was a local branch that went off the Warren Glen. It went off the main line west of Pattenberg, west of the tunnel. And it went to several customers. There was a paper mill and a chemical factory. And I think it crossed Route 519 at grade. That's where it joined the main line, back there in the woods, west of Bloomsbury. This is in the Alpha section of Phillipsburg, crossing a depression in the land. There's a CNJ bridge that's parallel with this. Both bridges are still there. The Valley Bridge is the one that's used. And that's Phillipsburg. That's the west end of the railroad in New Jersey. And I think I have just a few pictures out here. You had the Erie Lackawanna, the Lehigh Valley, the Jersey Central, the PRR, and the LNHR. It was a fabulous place to rail fan. And this is on the Pensy in downtown Phillipsburg, going up the Hudson Yard to interchange with the Pensy and the LNHR. I don't think you need that ice machine that day. And this is where Baker Chemical is. That's Hudson Yard, where the LNHR interchanged a lot with the Pensy. And this is in Phillipsburg. It's a Lehigh Valley crew using leased Norfolk and Western F units in the Pensy Yard in Phillipsburg. And here it is with SWs. Pensy engine over on the right. And this is switching in Kent Yard. And there's a local at the other end of the yard about to go over the bridge into Pennsylvania, which you can see in the background. And that's coming through Mount Parnassus Cut to interchange with the CNJ. The tracks in the foreground are CNJ, the Valley Main Line's in the background. And that's on the Valley Main Line in Phillipsburg. Not a very impressive looking main line. It's down to a single track. And that's crossing the Delaware River. So that's pretty much the end of our show here. This is actually on the Pensy side, looking toward New Jersey. But they've had some interesting operations over the years. That's one of those air products heat exchangers. And that's it. Everybody uses a caboose shot for the end shot.
Cool.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Tom.
Thank
And
you.
Mike Delvecchio actually is on the call. So Mike, I just wanted to bring you in if you wanted to say a couple words. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A. But thank you, Tom. This tremendous photography, and having grown up in New Jersey, been to a lot of these places, it's cool to see what once was.
Yeah, that's the heartbreak.
Yeah, I wanted to thank Tom for the show. That's some great stuff. A lot of that I've never seen before. That's terrific, especially the branch line stuff. For those who are going to watch the show again on YouTube, you'll notice some of those Lehigh Valley boxcars have the door opening the wrong way. That was something that Lehigh Valley insisted on in the steam era, was the boxcars open to the left instead of to the right. So it was fun to see those. What is such a difference between the Lehigh Valley then and today's Lehigh Valley.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to work on additional shows for Lehigh Valley, like in the Allentown area, and then Lehigh Valley in like over the mountain, Penobscot up to Coxton, and then Lehigh Valley West. So I can do 3 or 4 more Lehigh Valley shows if anybody's interested. I'll scan those slides and put shows together.
Very much so. And I know a handful over at the Anthracite group, they'll have the nose prints on their phones as they're watching it, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody's over there is watching it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was good stuff. Tell you, that 1F unit with the red paint missing below the black stripes, that was an interesting look. I've never seen that engine before either.
Yeah, well, the Valley never had 2 engines painted the same way after they got delivery of engines.
Yeah, right. Every delivery had a different paint scheme.
Different shade of red, different style of lettering, different font, everything. They just couldn't look at a picture and say, well, we got to match that.
Right.
But that's what made it interesting, as opposed to today, where there's 5,000 Norfolk Southern -9s out there and they all look the same,
Now, what do you remember about Oak Island Yard? Because I'd always heard that the Oak Island police were the worst in the area. They were tough on the rail fence.
Well, it's funny. We were always fearful. We had our hearts in our throat, but we usually, because we were in high school back then, we usually had to go on a weekend. So like on a Sunday afternoon, there was usually nobody around. So I don't think we ever got kicked out of there. We never got offered any cab rides or anything. We just never even encountered people. Like most of those engine terminal shots that you saw didn't show any workers or people walking around in it, because it was like second trick on Sunday and there was just nobody around.
In my era too, we'd hit Oak Island on the weekends, 91 Bay. We'd drive in, drive out. Nobody bothered us either,
Yeah, well, it's the same thing with the Susquehanna Little Ferry. We usually went there on a weekend, like on a Sunday, and there was nobody around. They just weren't a weekend railroad. So, the Valley did operate on weekends, but, it was at a much lower level. There was no local trains, and you had just the time freights, really.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
I do have a couple questions in here.
Okay.
Do they currently use the CNJ bridge in Peaburg? I think someone says,
Yes.
the Valley Bridge out of
Yes,
service.
the Valley Bridge is out of service. It still stands. It's got like chicken wire fencing on both ends to keep kids from walking across it. But I think you can even get around that because kids cut holes in fences. You put up a fence, they make a hole in it. But they do use the single track CNJ bridge. CNJ bridge used to be double track.
And we had someone inquire if you ever do a LNHR show.
Yeah, I have one. Why, you want to see it right now? Click. It'll be up in 2 minutes. I do have an LNHR show. I think it's,
It is only 8 o'clock.
Do you want to come back for December?
yeah, if you want, let me see. Yeah, LNHR 1962 to 1976 is 35 minutes. Yeah, most of my shows I've kept in like the 35-minute era. Some of them are a little longer because, you know,
Okay.
I don't care how good your material is or what your topic is. After an hour or so, looking at anything, even slideshows. And the other thing is, I'm sure you're going to probably get some comments like some of those images weren't on the screen very long. You know, they could have been on longer. Yeah, I understand that, but I'm a victim. I mean, a survivor of slideshows at Jersey Central NRHS. I won't have to mention names like Dick Townley or anything, but they put a slide up on the screen and then they proceed to describe the entire history of the railroad. And it was like, next slide, please. And that could get painful that way. That's why when you have a show like this where it's automatic and they just flow, it prevents that kind of tyranny.
Well, the beauty of this show, it's recorded, so they can go back and click pause.
That's true.
Right.
Well, but the funny story about slideshows with a projector, I remember this was always a problem when you were using a Kodak carousel projector with the clicker. What do you call that thing? The remote control.
Yeah.
You'd show a slide and then you'd go to the next slide and somebody in the back of the room would pipe up and say, could you go back to that last slide? Well, when you hit reverse on the thing, and you always made sure you hit the right button, a lot of times the projector would go forward a slide. It wouldn't go backward. So then you had to hit it again, and then you were back to the slide that you were initially on when the guy said, could you go back to the last slide? So it became kind of a chaotic thing. But what was even worse is if you had a recorded show, like some people have like a tape recorder going with the show, and then a way that when it was time to change the slide, the guy would have a click, click, or a ding or something like that to tell the operator of the projector to go to the next slide. The thing would get hopelessly confused and it just degenerated to mayhem. So I like the idea when the slideshow is driven. One of the nice things about that Photo Magico program that I use is that you can create a standalone show so that, like, if I gave you a copy of it on a thumb drive or on a DVD, you didn't have to buy or own the Photo Magico software, you know, like Photoshop or Quark Express or anything. You didn't have to buy the native software. You couldn't edit it or anything like that, but you could present it and look at it. You could see the show. And the other thing that was really nice, in addition to making it easy to lay out your show, you can move things around very easily by just drag and drop. The other thing that is nice is that you could vary the amount of time that each slide is on the screen independently. Like when you set up your show, you can set the default, like I want every slide on the screen for 10 seconds or 15 seconds. But then if you have a slide that has a lot of detail in it, or you have like a map or something with text, you can change just that one. And that's really nice. So it isn't like every slide has to be, you know, cut and dried the same time.
Yeah, your show went really well, and it's a good program.
Yeah. And of course, there's always the terror when you're giving a show. You don't have a techno oops. I think we pretty much solved that. In the early days of digital, even before Zoom, I mean, when it was a digital show in person at a train show meeting, I used to go to the Anthracite Railroad Historical Society meetings, and a lot of times somebody would have a digital show, and they'd have one of those big clunky digital projectors to show it on a screen. It wasn't like on a computer screen as you are here. A lot of times there was like, can you stand by, please? And, you know, the please stand by thing you see on a screen. And that was always like, we always wanted to do a pre-show test to make sure it was working right.
So Tom, did you ever shoot the Railway Valley since you were down that way?
I have a handful of shots of that, only a handful. And Richie King has every one that I've ever shot.
I do.
Once again, the problem was back then when we were Rugrats, when we were like in high school, the only days you had off were like Saturday and Sunday. So the Railway Valley didn't run on weekends. So a lot of railroads, Raritan River Railroad didn't run on weekends. A lot of those railroads was hard to shoot because when you were off, they were off. And once in a while you get lucky because you'd have a day off from school, like Good Friday or something, or the day after Thanksgiving, you'd be off from school, or Christmas vacation, you'd have a couple of weekdays off. And then it was still a pure weekday for the railroad, so they were running. But, and of course, the other problem you had then back then is we didn't drive. So either you had to con one of your parents into taking you somewhere, and they didn't have unlimited patience. Like, can we just sit here for 4 hours as trains come by? Well, that wasn't going to happen. The other problem was a lot of times we do it on our own. My partner in crime, Bill Chaplik, and I, we'd walk down to River Road near where I lived, get on a public service bus and take a bus to Bound Brook or New Brunswick, and then take a train to somewhere like the Jersey Central and get off at Cranford and then walk down to the Railway Valley interchange. And we actually walked to Kenilworth from the Jersey Central Cranford station. That's a couple miles, but when you're a kid, that's okay. You're in shape, you can do it. But it wasn't as easy as today, where you just jump in your car, blast to the track, get a shot and go home. You know, there was a lot of logistics involved, like getting to Little Ferry, getting to Croxton, places like that. You had to beg your parents to take you, you know.
Yep.
And they were pretty accommodating. So we were lucky.
Well, I'm impressed with how aware you were of railroading at that age.
Yeah, and I credit my friend Bill Chaplik as my mentor, not only on railroading, but on photography. Like, you got to be on the right side of the sun. You got to try and shoot at a higher shutter speed. You got to try and get composition in your shot, not just a roster shot of the front engine, but you want to see where it was taken. Otherwise, every F unit shot looks the same because there's no scenery there. So I tried to do that in the shots that I presented here, other than the roster section in the beginning, to show where it's taken. And there's a lot of work that goes into it. The other thing that was funny, like Bill and I, when we're sitting around having a beverage and recalling the old days of railroading, we say, we didn't have scanners. We didn't have Apple Maps or Google Maps. And you didn't have Facebook. So the only way you found out that something was happening, like in the later years, like in the 1970s, you went to tri-state meetings when they had in-person meetings, and Bob Bars or Gordon Wickham or somebody would stand up and say, oh, there's a big wreck on the EL. They're going to be diverting over the, Agabluga branch or something. And that's the only way you found that out. There was no social media. But the other thing was, when you're out in the field, like I said, you didn't have scanners. You just had to just keep looking down the track. And when the signal popped on green, you said, oh, green signal, something's coming. And then you knew something was coming and you got set up for your shot. And that's the only way you could tell when something was coming. You had no idea. You just sat there and waited by the track and waited and waited and waited. And you never knew if they were working on the track, so nothing's going to come all day. You didn't know that. But that said, back in those days, on most railroads, the CNJ particularly, the line was so busy, there was always something coming. A day in Bound Brook was like a day in heaven. And the question is, what would you pay today to just go back to Bound Brook for one day in like 1963? And just think of what you'd see.
Yeah, exactly.
Just think about it. What you'd see if you were there for one day on a weekday with rush hour and the Reading passenger trains and CNJ passenger trains and Baldwin A units on the CNJ and PAs going by on the Lehigh Valley and GP30s going by on the Port Reading branch. It was just amazing. And the saddest thing was, you always thought that it was going to be there forever. You never had the knowledge or the foresight to say, in a few years, all of this stuff's going to be gone. We got to just mortgage our souls and just buy as much film as we can and just shoot everything. It's like, we'll get around to going to Allentown next week or next year or whatever. You just thought it was always going to be there. Railroads were never going to go away. Highways don't go away. Airports don't go away. It was just going to be there forever. And it went away. So,
That's why we thank people like you for documenting it all for us to enjoy.
And I like sharing it. I always enjoy sharing what I have with people. If sometimes people call me up and say, oh, look, I'd pay you anything for just a copy of that slide or something, like, yeah, I'll send you a digital copy of it, and it's not a big deal. I shouldn't say that now, because now I'm going to get 300 emails from people. Give me that PA shot in Bound Brook. Yeah. But the idea is sharing. Well, that's the whole idea when I started RailPace. And that's the thing you do when you run the clubs. We do this for people. We don't do it for ourselves. And just being able to share it and share the techniques and everything with younger people is a wonderful thing. And I think that's one thing that the NRHS needs to work on, is trying to get more young people in. I know Tri-State is now pretty much a freestanding historical society, but with NRHS, I still belong, but I haven't been to the conventions in years, because it's just a bunch of people walking around with oxygen tanks taking bus trips. They don't have train trips anymore. So
I can relate to what you said about sharing. I spend so much more time on pictures taken by other people and getting stuff into print that I spend very little time on my own stuff, which I should change that and just get my own stuff out there.
Yeah, well, Rich John just talked me into buying a new scanner. There's nothing wrong with the scanner I had, but it's a Epson V700 flatbed scanner, and it works well and it does good quality. But he's been bugging me to buy a Plus-Tech scanner, so I bought it and I got it in 24 hours from B&H, and it's like 3 times as fast as the other one, and
Really?
it does equally high quality. I think that's what Steve Barry uses too, a Plus-Tech scanner.
Well, I've got the V700 and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it does.
The Plus-Tech, is that you put the slide in the mount and it just scans it in the mount?
Yeah, in the mount. You always do that in the mount. You don't want to have to, like the old days of scanning for the magazine, like back in the 1990s and early 2000s, they had to take the slide out of the mount and put it on a drum and then drum scan it.
Right.
Man, and it was like $100 per scan. But now you do it yourself for free, and you don't have to take it out of the mount.
All right, is the Plus-Tech a flatbed at all, or is it?
No. It's about the size of, well, smaller than the size of a shoebox.
Yeah.
I mean, wait a minute. I don't know if I can do this. Hold on. If I take the screen, maybe you can see it. It's on my desk right here. I don't know if there's enough light to see it. It's probably too dark.
Yeah,
but
it is dark.
it's sitting here. Well, I could light it up with my phone, but anyway, yeah, and it's idiot proof. It holds here. You have a slide. So how do I do this here?
No, you did it.
It holds 4 slides. You just snap them in there, and then you take this and you just put it in the scanner. You have to manually advance it after each one scans, but it's 3 times as fast as the Epson, and you don't have to do that preview page. That also takes a couple of minutes. And it does the double pass scan.
Right.
So the
I
quality.
will, but some of the old slides, like the old Anscos and everything, I like restoring the old slides.
Yeah.
And there's some detail under the mount you want. So I still slice a lot of slides just to get.
But then they're so boogered up. I mean, they're kind of like falling apart and taped together, and you could never put them in a carousel. Although I don't know, I haven't turned my slide projector on it in the last couple of years. Why would you bother?
Oh, I donated my carousels. I had 4 carousel projectors for the multimedia shows, and I gave those. So.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you might want to consider for everybody that has slides, for all you dinosaurs out there like me, if you have Anscochromes, fortunately I never had that. If you have Yectochromes, and I do have a fair number of those, you need to get them scanned because they're starting to turn red and they start to deteriorate. So once you get them scanned and you save them as a TIFF, you're pretty safe. And of course, save them in a couple different places, obviously.
Yep.
But, you don't have to burn CDs, but you can put them on a Drobo or something.
And I'm amazed at how good those slides look once you get in there and start editing them. And
yeah. Well, everybody knows how much digital photography is better than slide photography as far as sharpness and colored. Like with slides, when you shot a picture of something, anything that was in shadow was jet black. There was just no detail in it. Right. But with digital, of course, you can lighten that up easy in Photoshop. But that said, even with slides that you've scanned, you can make radical improvements in Photoshop. Radical. I mean, color correction, going downhill effect. A lot of times you get a slide and it's cockeyed or a little bit, whether it's mounted in the mount that way by Kodak or whether you didn't hold your camera steady, whatever the problem was. The only thing you can't fix that you screwed up is blur. Like if you have speed blur, as you saw in some of those slides that I had. If it's blurred, it's blurred, But just about anything, underexposure, overexposure, off color, going downhill, most of that you can get rid of, or you can fix.
All right.
So it's just amazing.
Well, thank you, Tom. We greatly appreciate you coming out and doing the Lehigh Valley show. It was really well received. We had
Yeah.
about 120 people log on to watch.
Oh, really? That many? Wow.
Yeah,
Impressive.
on here and on Facebook. So it was really
Okay.
well received. We got a lot of great comments, and I'll definitely reach out to you for another future show. You guys,
Yeah,
you
like
have-
December, somebody said. Well,
Yeah.
I always told you guys in Tri-State, if you ever get caught at the last minute, somebody calls up and says, look, I got COVID, I can't come, or I can't do this or something, call me up, because now that we have Zoom and I have these things on my laptop here, I just click and it's instantly on, So
yeah, absolutely. We appreciate that.
not like, can you get down here in an hour and 15 minutes? It's like, although I do miss the meetings. I love going to the meetings, seeing the people and chatting, and always going to the diner later with Boyd and all
We're
those guys.
trying to get that going again.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. And
Yes. Thank you, Tom.
I can send you an email that has a list of all the slideshows that I already have. I think I have 14 that are digital.
Yeah, that would be great.
All righty.
Thanks very much.
I guess we'll sign off here.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, for attending. The next show will be the second Thursday in October on the Lackawanna Cutoff,
That sounds
and
good.
we'll see everyone then.
Okay.
Yeah, Tom, they might be busy this fall. If they are, I might be dropping by.
What was this? I'm sorry, what?
I said the F3 might be busy this fall. If they
Oh,
are.
yeah. Richie's coming up tomorrow night. He stays here every Friday night to work on your engine.
Well, and his.
Well, now that you're feeling a little better, maybe you can come up and help too.
Well, I've been going up there, so
Yeah, and if you ever need a place to stay, you can always crash here. He does.
yeah, I know he does, and it's a nice drive. It's a third of the way for me,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it'll save you 2 hours of driving round trip.
And could buy Pennsylvania a Christmas gift, it would be at a third lane between Tannersville and the Water Gap, because coming home on Sundays, that's brutal.
Yeah, we know about that.
Yeah.
All righty, guys.
All right.
Pleasure to do
Good
this
night.
for you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
Right. Bye-bye, everybody.